In the Bay of Bengal, there is an island you cannot visit, not because of red tape or special military zones. The people who live there will kill you. They have shot arrows at helicopters, killed a missionary bringing fish and hymns, and turned back every attempt at contact. The world has largely taken the hint. No linguist has ever decoded their language. No anthropologist has sat inside their homes. But science found a different way in, not through direct contact, but through DNA. The same technology that is rewriting Bronze Age history is now telling us something extraordinary about these islands. What it reveals does not just explain one remote tribe, it changes the story of how humanity itself spread across the planet. How can DNA reveal secrets about a people who reject all contact? North Sentinel Island feels like a natural fortress. It is 60 square kilometers of dense tropical forest, almost perfectly square. Coral reefs completely ring the island. They have wrecked many ships that got too close. Two peaks rise about 120 meters above sea level near the island's center. These elevations likely saved lives when the 2004 tsunami hit the Indian Ocean. The island sits about 40 kilometers from the main Andaman chain. It is close enough to see on a clear day, but it is far enough to remain truly separate. From above, it looks like any other forested tropical island. From the water, it looks like a place that does not want visitors. The people who live there have no name we know for themselves. We call them the Sentinelese, after the island. They had no part in choosing that name. Estimates for their population range widely, from 50 to 400 individuals. This widespread tells you how little direct observation has ever been possible. What we can see from a distance suggests they are healthy and active. They do not seem short on food. The surrounding waters provide plenty of fish, turtles, and shellfish. The forest offers birds and boar. An explorer named Portman noted a pile of boar skulls near a village in 1880. This suggests they hunt them, or it was the world's most unsettling garden feature. Their technology is consistently underestimated. They work iron. This sounds wrong for a people we call Stone Age, but it is true. They do not smelt it. They scavenge it. Shipwrecks have been delivering raw material to their shores for centuries. The Sentinelese have been cold working it ever since. They score metal with hard stone flakes, then they bend and snap it until a usable piece emerges. They grind an edge with abrasive rock. Early visitors saw arrowheads tipped with this iron. Their arrows are long, almost the height of the shooter. They are barbed just behind the point. This design works equally well for catching fish and for discouraging anthropologists. Their canoes are narrow outriggers. They steer them with poles, not paddles. This limits them to shallow coastal waters, but it makes them highly effective for the fishing and hunting their environment demands. Physically, they are smaller-framed people. They look similar to the neighboring Andamanese. How did these Stone Age people get iron, and why are they so isolated? The written record of contact with North Sentinel Island begins like many colonial-era stories. Someone saw something. They made a smart choice. In 1771, John Ritchie from the East India Company noticed fires burning on the shore. He sailed on. No one died. That was an excellent decision. Almost a century went by before anyone else felt the need to comment. In 1867, a ship called the Nineveh, an Indian merchant vessel, was caught in a monsoon. It wrecked on the island's reef. All 86 crew members made it to the beach. For 2 days, they stayed alive, apparently unaware of whose land they were on. On the third morning, they found out. The captain later wrote that attackers came. They used arrows tipped with iron. This tells you something important. By 1867, the Sentinelese had been working salvaged metal long enough that it had become standard equipment. The Royal Navy eventually arrived. They pulled the survivors off the island. Everyone lived. That would not always be the case. Then came M.V. Portman. In 1880, this British officer who oversaw the Andaman Islands arrived at North Sentinel. He brought a large expedition party. Portman was a complex man. He had a variety of unusual personal interests. Those probably deserve their own documentary. But what matters here is what he did on the island. On his second visit, his team found a Sentinelese family deep in the forest. A fight broke out. Portman's own journal says they captured 6 people. They took them to Port Blair. This was in the interest of science. The 2 adults died almost right away. The 4 children went back to the island with gifts. They almost certainly carried diseases their immune systems could not handle. Portman later wrote that the trip did nothing except make outsiders more terrifying. He was, at least, right about that. The other Andamanese people saw this pattern play out on a massive scale. British colonization brought sickness, forced labor, and the Battle of Aberdeen. There, about 1,500 islanders armed with bows faced men with firearms and a cannon offshore. The outcome was not close. Within decades, populations that had thrived independently for thousands of years were dying. Measles and malnutrition killed them in settlements they did not choose. The Sentinelese did not see any of this directly, but the island's reputation for hostility grew stronger through every decade of the 19th century. This made complete sense from their perspective. In 1896, a convict escaped from Port Blair. He reached the island on a makeshift raft. A search party found him on the beach, dead. He was filled with arrows. After that, the island was mostly left alone. That lasted for the better part of 50 years. The boundary had been drawn, but it was not settled. John Allen Shaw was born in Alabama in 1991. He grew up on adventure stories, tales of missionaries on distant frontiers, of boys making friends with people on the edges of the known world. He went to a Christian high school. He became a passionate outdoorsman. Along the way, he developed a singular, all-consuming drive to bring the gospel to isolated tribes. He prepared for it with intense focus. He took wilderness survival courses. He studied linguistic anthropology. He even named Jim Elliot as an inspiration. Elliot was a missionary killed by a tribal group in Ecuador. As far as warning signs go, that one is fairly clear. Chow fixed his sights on North Sentinel Island. In his journal, he called it Satan's last stronghold. His anthropology courses, it seems, never covered the part about imposing his own religious views on people who knew nothing about theology. In November 2018, he paid local fishermen to take him close to the island. On his first attempt, he paddled a kayak to shore. He met 2 Sentinelese people. He threw them a fish. He paddled away. No arrows hit him. He saw this as a good sign. He came back the same day. This time, 6 men waited on the beach. He tried to mimic their words. He wrote in his journal that they burst out laughing. He thought they were probably insulting him. Honestly, that moment is the most human part of his entire story. Then a child shot an arrow. It hit the Bible he held against his chest. He swam a mile back to the boat. He recorded this in his journal as evidence of progress. The next morning, he returned for a 3rd time. His final journal entry asked God if it would be smarter to leave and let someone else finish the mission. He decided it would not be. He wrote a goodbye to his family. He asked them not to try and get his body. The fishermen, watching from a distance, later reported seeing the Sentinelese drag something along the beach and bury it. Several fishermen were arrested for helping him get to the island. Chaw's father publicly blamed evangelical culture for pushing his son toward an end that almost everyone who knew anything about North Sentinel Island had clearly foreseen. The Sentinelese are the victims here. They were defending their home against an intruder. He had been warned by the Indian government. He had been warned by every historian who wrote about the island. He had been warned by an arrow through his Bible. And he came back anyway. They have been left alone since 2018. That is the right outcome. It is the only one that makes any sense. The incident underscores their impenetrable isolation. But it raises a deeper question. What makes their existence so unique and valuable that it warrants such extreme protection? The Sentinelese have kept outsiders away with arrows, but a different kind of investigation was happening on the nearby islands. This one did not need anyone's permission. It did not end with a body on a beach. Scientists used ancient DNA from old bones across the Andaman archipelago. This built a picture of who these people really are. This was not about putting them into colonial categories. Those attempts failed already. This was about tracing their ancestors, where they came from, how long they lived there, what their story tells us about human movement across the planet. The method is the same one rewriting Bronze Age history. Scientists take genetic material from teeth and inner ear bones. That is where biological information lasts the longest. Then they read what is left. When they looked at ancient Andamanese remains, the results were striking. They demanded serious attention. The Andamanese, and almost certainly the Sentinelese as the most isolated group, carry DNA from some of the first modern humans to leave Africa. Their family tree does not connect neatly to any mainland Asian group. It stands alone. It is ancient. It is remarkably intact. Geography preserved it in a way almost nowhere else on Earth can match. Estimates put their ancestors on these islands for over 40,000 years. That is before agriculture, before bronze, before every civilization that ever rose and fell. They kept fishing from outrigger canoes the whole time. Their physical appearance led generations of outsiders to make confident, wrong conclusions. Darker skin and certain facial features are just adaptations. They help people live in intense equatorial sunlight. These traits evolved many times in different places throughout human history. Genetically, Andamanese people are much closer to East Asian groups than to any African one. Their appearance is convergent evolution. The DNA tells a completely different story. The Sentinelese are especially important in this picture. Their absolute unbroken isolation enforced by arrows protected their gene pool. Later, migration waves swept across mainland Asia. They absorbed or replaced most groups that carried this early ancestry. Everywhere else, that ancient signal got diluted. On North Sentinel Island, behind a reef and a wall of bows, that signal may be more complete than anywhere else on Earth. The people the world tried to contact for centuries might be the most irreplaceable genetic archive we have. The Sentinelese hold a unique genetic key, but how does this rewrite the global story of human migration? For decades, geneticists argued about how modern humans left Africa and spread across the planet. The common idea for most of the 20th century was simple. The main path led through the Middle East and into Central Asia. Populations slowly spread out across Eurasia over tens of thousands of years. This model was not exactly wrong, but it was not complete either. Genetics kept pointing to something different. Something happened earlier, faster, and along a completely new path. This is the Southern Coastal Dispersal Hypothesis. It suggests the first wave of modern humans out of Africa did not go northeast into the land. They followed the coastline. They moved through the Arabian Peninsula, along the shores of South Asia, and through Southeast Asia. They even hopped between islands when they had to. They reached Australia possibly 65,000 years ago. These people were not slowly settling a continent. They stayed close to the coast. They used resources from the ocean. This allowed them to move with a speed the inland route could not match. The Andamanese genetics sit right in the middle of this debate. Their ancestry links directly to this early coastal wave. Later, mainland Asian populations do not show the same connection. The migrations that filled most of Asia came later. They moved through different areas. They carried different genetic signals. These later groups largely replaced or absorbed the earlier populations left behind on the mainland. The Andaman Islands, sitting offshore, were only reachable by water. They were bypassed. The people already there stayed there. Their DNA kept the original signal. Everywhere else, that signal was overwritten. The connection goes even further. Ancient DNA from Papuan and Aboriginal Australian groups shows deep shared ancestry with the Andamanese. This is the biological fingerprint of that same early coastal spread. It is a thread running from the Bay of Bengal all the way to the Torres Strait. It is visible only in the genetics. It documents a migration that left almost no other trace. What the Sentinelese represent in this picture is the most untouched part of that entire ancient network. This population has been on the same island since before this migration was even finished. They were never absorbed. They were never replaced. They were never diluted by the waves of movement that changed everyone else. The arrows that have kept outsiders away for all of recorded history have accidentally saved something geneticists would give almost anything to study properly. There is something quietly amazing about that. The people the modern world has most consistently failed to contact may carry the clearest biological memory of how the modern world began. The scientific value of the Sentinelese is immense, but what are the ethical implications of this discovery for their future? The legal framework around North Sentinel Island is unusually sensible. India declared it a tribal reserve in 1956. They set up a 3 nautical mile exclusion zone. Eventually, officials settled on an eyes-on, hands-off policy. This means periodic checks from a safe distance confirm the tribe appears healthy. No landing, no contact attempts, no exceptions. John Allen Shaw's case showed this rule is worth enforcing. The argument for leaving them alone becomes much stronger when you look at what happened to other Andamanese tribes. These tribes did not have an impenetrable reef or a fierce rejection of outsiders to protect them. The Jarawa and the Onge tribes were brought into sustained contact with the modern world. They received medicine, settled housing, and access to food systems they had never developed themselves. The people involved had good intentions, but the outcome was terrible. Within decades, these populations had maintained robust health and strong cultural identities for thousands of years. Now, they struggled. They faced malnutrition, alcohol dependency, and a deep sense of aimlessness. This happens when the entire structure of a society's existence gets removed and replaced with something that simply does not fit. Some travel companies even ran tours near Jarawa territory. They were accused of organizing what were essentially human safaris. They paid tribal members food just for dancing for tourists. That sentence should not exist, but it does. The Sentinelese, by contrast, are thriving by every measure we can observe. They have healthy bodies. There is consistent evidence of children and pregnant women. Their population appears to be sustaining itself comfortably within the island's capacity. They have everything they need. They have had it for 40,000 years without any outside help at all. The zoo hypothesis often gets applied to the Sentinelese as a thought experiment. This is the idea that an advanced civilization might watch a less developed one from a careful distance without getting involved. If an extraterrestrial civilization were watching us the way we watch them, what would we want them to do? The Sentinelese have already answered that question for themselves, repeatedly. They have done it with great clarity and in many ways. The ethical imperative to leave them alone is clear. But what does their continued isolation mean for our own understanding of human progress and knowledge? The island you are not allowed to visit, that is how we started this story. Now, we understand it as a choice they have consistently defended. Science confirms this outcome is the correct one. My view is simple: leave them alone. This is not about scientific preservation, or even because their DNA is valuable, though it truly is. It is because these are people who have expressed their preferences about contact with extraordinary consistency. Respecting that means nothing more complicated than just stopping. This is the DNA paradox. The very science that shows how irreplaceable they are to understanding human history also builds the strongest case for never disturbing them to gather more data. Some questions are worth leaving unanswered. The Sentinelese will likely never know their DNA is rewriting textbooks about human migration. They do not need to. They were fishing those reefs and working salvaged iron into arrowheads for 40,000 years before anyone thought to extract meaning from ancient bones. They will keep doing exactly that, no matter what geneticists conclude in laboratories on the other side of the planet. Their isolation is not something that just happened to them. It is something they chose, defended, and enforced with a consistency that puts most human commitments to shame. Their genetics do not grant us access. They do not create an obligation they owe to human knowledge. If anything, their story gives us one more reason to understand precisely what we would lose if we ever stopped respecting the boundary they have spent millennia making unmistakably clear. Subscribe if this kind of insight into humanity's past and present is something you want more of. And tell me, what other historical or scientific mysteries do you think are best left alone?